What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today I want to talk about a mechanic that is very unique and very complex, and that is Mutate. Mutate was a set mechanic that was introduced in Ikoria, Lair of the Behemoths. It is no longer standard legal, however, it is still legal in older formats like Historic and Explorer. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because it provides some cool deck building options that you may not understand if you're not familiar with how the mechanic itself works. Mutate is an ability that appears exclusively on creatures, and that's very important. When you cast a creature with Mutate, you have the choice of either casting it for its normal mana cost, in which case it's a creature that behaves just like any other creature, or you can cast it for its Mutate cost. If you choose to cast it for its Mutate cost, you select a non-human creature that you control and own. You target it, and when you mutate, that creature then melds with the creature you already have. And the way that it works is you choose which creature card is going to represent the top or the bottom of a stack then. So the card that is on top is going to dictate the creature's color identity, the mana value, and its power and toughness, and any relevant types, as well as its name. Those are all very important elements that you need to be aware of for various reasons, of course. But the big thing that the cards on the bottom of the stack provide are their text boxes. So they add any abilities to these creatures. So if, for example, a creature that you're mutating onto has flying, the resulting creature that is a merger of these two things will have flying. Other mutate creatures, like the migratory greathorn, for example, have an ability that when it mutates, you do something. In the case of migratory greathorn, it's rampant growth. You search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Pretty powerful ability and can be very useful in a deck that has need for a lot of mana. The cool thing about that is that triggers when you cast the migratory greathorn's mutate spell from your hand onto another creature, as well as if you take another mutation creature from your hand and mutate it on top of that migratory greathorn. So you get that trigger multiple times potentially throughout the course of the game if your mutation creature survives and you get an opportunity to mutate onto it again. So that can be very, very powerful if you're able to stack multiple creatures with mutation triggers on top of each other. It is also worth noting there are some mutation triggers that are incredibly powerful, and a lot of those you see on the Apex Predator series. These are 3-color creatures from Ikoria. For example, you have Snapdax, who is capable of dealing 4 damage to any target and gaining you 4 life every time it mutates. And on top of that, in the case of Snapdax, you're also adding double strike to your mutation stack. That's a pretty darn big deal. We also have cards like Nethroi, the Apex of Death, who is capable of reanimating creatures every single time it mutates. So it's very expensive, but for good reason. You get a ton of value off it, and you can get that value repeatedly simply by mutating additional creatures onto the stack later. So from a strategic perspective, why would you want to use this? It does have one fatal flaw. The biggest issue with Mutate is a 2-for-1 problem. If you have multiple creatures mutated onto themselves, if you have multiple creatures merged together, they are a single creature for the purposes of the game. If your opponent has a kill spell of any kind that can take out an individual creature, if it removes that one creature, even if you have 5 different mutations on it, they're all gone, period. That's why the base creature that you start your mutation stack with is so important. Abilities like Hexproof and Indestructible are very, very valuable to add to your mutation mix. And Wizards knew that, and as a result, they don't have any mutation creatures existing as of this recording that add Hexproof or Indestructible to your mutation stack. Therefore, having a mutation base creature like a Paradise Druid that can functionally have Hexproof as long as you don't tap it, it's excellent. In fact, it makes it very difficult for your opponent to take advantage of that kill spell that they may be sitting on because of that hexproof. Very, very valuable, very, very important. That's why you see cards like that appear in mutation stacks. And in Commander, there are all kinds of different options. There are, they're boggle type creatures that have hexproof natively on very cheap creatures. So you'll see that in Commander as well. So mutation is a very fun mechanic. You can do some incredibly cool things with it, especially if you stack multiple creatures on top of each other. That's where things get weird. Also, if a mutation creature were to be blinked, if it were to leave the battlefield and then return to the battlefield, you may wonder what happens. Does it all come back recombined? In fact, it does not. What ends up happening is every single creature that was within it enters as a separate creature, because when they go into exile, the fact that they were mutated together is no longer remembered. The game does not save that information. So when they return as individual creatures. So that could be great, or it could be a real problem for you, depending on how you're trying to build your deck. If you really want to kill your opponent by mutating onto something a bunch of times, with, say, a hemophage in the mix, then all of a sudden, that drains your opponent every time you mutate. That is a great way to do it. That's a good way to win in a mutate deck. However, if your mutate stack breaks apart like that, if your opponent bounces it, or if you manage to blink it, then all of a sudden what ends up happening is all these other creatures are on the field, and while they do all have decent stats, that may not be what you're going for, what you're hoping for. That said, being flexible when you're playing Mutate is very important. Sometimes you just need to chip in for that damage, and that's that. Also, mutation stacks are not all designed the same. The blue mutation creatures in Sea Dasher, Octopus, and Pouncing Shore Shark are definitely tempo creatures. These have flash, and you can mutate. You can cast them for their mutate cost at instant speed. That's very, very valuable, and this can get you mutation triggers at instant speed, which is pretty darn cool, especially with Pouncing Shore Shark in combat. Being able to bounce blockers or bounce attackers that are coming into you can be very, very valuable, as you can imagine. And you can surprise your opponent with that, which feels really good. So those creatures are very much tempo driven, whereas a lot of the black creatures or the green creatures are just huge monsters that are here to be huge monsters. One great example of this is the Auspicious Sterix. This card, I cannot believe this card is an uncommon. If you are running Mutate, I would highly recommend you take a look at this card, because it is cracked in half. If you have a decent mutate stack already, if you've got 3 creatures in it, for example, you mutated an Auspicious Sterix on top of it, you now have a 6/6 that's getting all the benefits of all the other creatures below it, and now you also just reveal cards off the top of your library until you hit 4 new permanents, and they just enter the battlefield. Now, these could be lands, but I mean, just 4 lands for casting out a 6-drop. I mean, that's still great. And then you might also get creatures. Now, a lot of the time you're going to be getting creatures that would be mutation creatures otherwise, which, you may want them in your hand rather than on the battlefield, to be frank, but having additional bodies on board is never a bad thing. So it's very, very powerful, very, very useful, and they printed it at uncommon. So I just want to put that on your radar. Another phenomenal one to be aware of that you probably are going to want to run in all of your mutation decks is Gem Raiser. This is a great card. Worst case scenario, the floor on this thing is a 4/4 reach trampler for 4. That's not bad. You can do a lot worse than that. And you can mutate it onto another creature for 3, and if you do that, you not only get the 4/4 trample reach action on whatever creature you mutated, but now it also comes with a naturalize effect that lets you blow up an artifact or enchantment your opponent controls. So it's just great. It's phenomenal value. It's great on rate. This one they knew to print it rare, and with good reason. But yeah, so that is Mutate in a nutshell. If you have any questions about Mutate and want to understand how it works, please let me know in the comments below. There is a lot of nuance and a lot of weird fringe cases that Mutate introduces that you don't necessarily see with other mechanics and other effects. But Mutate definitely has those, and you can take a lot of them to your advantage. You can do some really cool things with that. So I would highly recommend you to experiment and practice. Having blink spells in your own deck, for example, is a really cool way to take advantage of that ability to split the mutation stack, because that can present a situation where if your opponent has 1 chump blocker and they think, okay, I'm going to survive 1 more turn, on their end step or during their turn, you can blink the creature out and it comes back as a whole army all of a sudden that maybe they didn't have an answer to. Also, this can be especially useful with cards like Teferi's Time Twist, where when the creature enters back onto the battlefield, it comes back in with a +1/+1 counter. Because in this case, since you have like 5 or 6 creatures entering the battlefield, all of them will have +1/+1 counters. It's pretty cool. So I just want to throw that out there as one way to build this deck, or some tech that you can use in your brews. So thank you so much for checking out this video. I appreciate it very, very much. If you found this helpful, please hit the subscribe button below if you have not already done so, and give it a like. It actually helps out the algorithm phenomenally. phenomenally, and the channel's always growing, so every little bit helps. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.